our city get all the love it needs by getting rid of all the chemicals and neutral waste, because we don't want to have to do this again. I don't want to live close to chemicals in the mountains. I want to be as safe as anyone that is safe. I want to help other people to be safe. I don't want to get cancer again, because cancer was a very scary thing when I was in the hospital. And I had to get GI tubes and pokes like 10 times or more than that. And it wasn't very fun. And you don't want cancer either. So we want to get all the love back again. Please clean up the chemicals in the mountains.
Thank you, Chris, very much. And then Michael Smith, and then we will take a 5-minute break for the front of the room to have a chance to go to the restroom. Devyn?
My name is Devyn Gortner. I grew up less than 5 miles from the site. I'm the founder of Teens Against Toxins, and I'm here today, as I have been for almost a decade, to speak on behalf of the younger community near SSFL. I wish I could play on repeat what Grace and Ryan said to you, but instead I'm going to take my background as an environmental and nuclear policy researcher to debunk the claim that DOE has been making that these alternatives are protective of human health. The DOE claims their risk-based cleanup option would allow 25 milligram per year exposure. This is the equivalent of a chest x-ray per month or a year for decades. But the actual number is far higher. Please bear with me, I promise what I'm about to share is simple math. To calculate its estimated risk to human health, DOE claims to have used the suburban residential scenario, but actually left out the garden component of that scenario, which is required to be included. In fact, the DOE's risk estimates lowball the dose by a factor of at least 100, if not 1,000. By comparison, if you run EPA's dose compliance calculator for the same scenario used, but include the backyard garden component as required, and look at the amount of strontium-90 that would yield a dose of 25 milligram, which is what the DOE is proposing, you'd be looking at 19.4 picocuries per gram. The DOE is proposing a standard of 1,200 picocuries per gram of strontium-90. That is 62 x-rays a month, or 744 a year for decades. Children like Grace and Ryan, pregnant women, families would be exposed to those levels. And remember, the DOE's proposed standard is based on a dose and concentrations that are averaged over a wide area, meaning the contaminated places are diluted by averaging with lower readings half a mile away. So the actual exposure could be more than 744 x-rays a year, even in the thousands. My family has a history of heart problems, and we're familiar with chest x-rays, and even our doctors recommend no more than 1 a year. The thought of being forced to get thousands is totally inconceivable and infuriating. I said it on Saturday, I'll say it again. You promised me you would protect me, my family, and my community. You promised 6 years ago that you would clean up the mess you made so it would be like you never made it in the first place. The community has debunked every single one of your excuses as to why you cannot keep this promise. Maybe we will never have definitive proof that the exact contamination you left created the cancer that plagues Grace and Ryan and dozens of other children. But even the slightest chance it could be linked should be more than enough to act and act now. Better safe than sorry. It rained today, washing more and more of the contamination down into the neighborhoods below the site. Tomorrow it's going to be sunny and the kids are going to go back to playing in their yards. Your move.
Or maybe it's Kristin.
My name is Kristin Story. I'm a public school teacher and a mother, and I am not irrational. I am not an irrational person. I'm a very rational person. I live in a world where I look at facts, I study up on things, I pay attention to scientists and doctors, people who I trust to know what is dangerous and what is not. I have a colleague who couldn't be here tonight who's also a teacher. She was not able to make it tonight due to an illness. She lived in Bell Canyon, and when Boeing lied to her face and said that there was no cancer cluster danger because it was on the other side from where she was living, she packed up her house, her husband and she sold that house and got out of there with their 2 small children. Thank God. am in outrage that DOE is proposing to break its AOC commitments to clean up all the radioactive toxic chemicals and contaminations. It's an outrage. The AOC expressly prohibits consideration of any leave-in-place alternatives, yet DOE is proposing to leave in place huge amounts of contamination. DOE estimates that it could take up to 70 years for the specific toxic materials to attenuate to required levels, so I'm glad attenuation was just brought up. It is outrageous that DOE wants to leave the hazardous materials, which have already been contaminating SSFL for 70 years, in place another 70 years, so the nearby communities would have faced 140 years of migration and exposure. That means for all our lifetimes, the contamination that DOE created will be in the midst of our communities, migrating down to expose people, and yes, little children, and the environment. But even the 70-year estimate for leaving the toxic total petroleum hydrocarbons, or TPHs, to supposedly attenuate is false. DOE cites to a particular report as the basis for that conclusion, but in fact it is simply citing to another report which doesn't actually conclude that the hazardous materials will degrade in 70 years. In fact, that report says it could take very much longer, because the easiest material to degrade long ago did, and what is now left degrades very slowly, if at all. In fact, when the study measured the degradation rate given the actual conditions of the site, it found no natural attenuation at all. So once again, DOE misrepresenting the facts. That's sad. That is what is sad. It was a quote from a DOE, John Jones, I believe, a quote from the Ventura County Star, this last article that was done. Whether it is 70 years DOE wants to leave the TPHs in place or far longer is totally and completely unacceptable. Also, the great majority of the contamination DOE now proposes to walk away from, it admits that there is basically no attenuation at all, that it will be there for all practical purposes for eternity, capable of continued migration off-site. This isn't an irrational statement I'm making. This is fact based on science. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Raj will be followed by Jim Summers and then Marjorie Brown.
My name is Robert Dodge. I'm a family physician in Ventura, and I'm the president of Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles. For over 30 years, PSRLA has advocated for a cleanup of the Santa Susana site that is fully protective of the public health. That standard is met by the 2010 Agreement on Consent that DOE signed, which stipulates that DOE's portion of Santa Susana Lab will be cleaned up to background levels of contamination. That is, any contamination that is detected will be cleaned up. In the DEIS risk assessment, the DOE is either incompetent, purposely misleading, or both, and neither is acceptable. DOE has claimed today, and in recent VC Star article, that it is complying with the AOC and all of its alternatives are protective of public health. But that is not true. All four of the options that DOE has presented violate the AOC and risk public health. DOE says that option 1 entails cleaning up 933,000 cubic yards, but on page 29 of the DEIS, the summary admits that a total soil contaminant is 1,400,000 cubic yards. That would leave 500,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil in place, which violates the AOC. DOE tries to justify this by declaring that the soil may be subject to natural attenuation or degrading over time, and by grossly misrepresenting the AOC's biological exemption, which is strictly limited in the AOC and which they do not qualify for. Option 2 claims to clean up the site to risk-based screening levels for suburban residential use, and that the cancer risk would be 1 in a million, or 10 to the minus 6. But a footnote on page S31, number 22 of the DEIS summary indicates that DOE is not, as it claims, following the DTSC-approved standard risk assessment methodology, and has left out the major required exposure pathways and using values that are 1,000 times higher than the standard suburban residential goals. That means 1,000 times higher risk than the 1 in a million risk assessment. Option 3 is most certainly not health protective. The EPA states that exposure to 25 millirem a year is not health protective and should not be used for cleanup. Yet exposure to 25 millirem is the equivalent of a dozen unnecessary chest x-rays per year, every year, over an average lifespan. And because the DOE uses averaging, which they are precluded from doing, and keeps out the garden pathway required to be individual and representing 99% of the dose, it is closer to hundreds of unnecessary chest x-rays per year, at a lifetime risk thousands or tens of thousands times higher than the DOE claims. This is unacceptable. The National Academy of Sciences has concluded there is no safe level of radiation. No safe level. Every amount exposes you to some increased risk over background of cancer, particularly for pregnant women and children. The DOE must comply by the AOC and clean up all of its contamination.
My name is Elaina Semper. I spoke the other day, but I'd like to reiterate. I'm a climate reality project leader, and I'm on Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council's Sustainability Committee. As a near lifetime Valley resident, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I fully support AOC and urge you to do the same. DOE's alternatives are not in compliance and risk human, animal, and environmental health. We need this long-term solution and not alternative obvious risk. Truck emissions by no means are comparable, and you can't mitigate radionuclides. I've lived in the valley since 1970 and experienced all major earthquakes, including the Northridge quake, which rose the ground 12 feet. With a critical earthquake fault running under Aliso Canyon and our heavy winds, there's no guarantee now for decades to come, let alone centuries. Your alternative methods and solutions resemble alternative facts, and they're the opposite of quality of life. You mentioned educating the public over the years to understand cleaning up the site. Now the majority of the public wants the site thoroughly cleaned up and fully comply with AOS. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to try a little better. Then Farida Khmer, and then Karen DiBiase.
Hi, I'm Mark Dow. I'm a West Hills resident. I've been a resident there since 1996. My wife and I had 2 children, both born in West Hills. We live about a mile from the site, over the hill. My daughter was diagnosed recently with leukemia, a rare form called APL, which the doctors said was directly related to an environmental issue. They didn't say what issue, but they said it was an environmental issue. She was treated at Children's Hospital for the last 8 months. Our neighborhood has also had other cancers. We've had 2 children with brain cancer. We've had an adult die from brain cancer. We've also had 2 other cancers within our block. So when people say there's no direct correlation, I have to object to the doctor on the APL. It is related to the environment from what our doctors told us. So I've been coming to these since probably early 2000s. Never thought that my daughter or son would be affected. And I'm troubled that it's taken this long to get to where we're at, considering all the involvement of all these people who have been working very, very hard to try to get you guys to wake up. And it is just appalling. And to watch my daughter go through what she went through in the hospital, it was gut-wrenching. Cried every day. You guys got to get your act together. You're operating like a typical bureaucratic government, and no sense of urgency. We were there when the fires burned that site, and I could see the ashes coming into my yard, and they looked extremely strange. They weren't typical ashes, and you could see it was muddy and gluey particles coming into our neighborhoods. And it was appalling. And so I'm with the people who are probably a lot more knowledgeable than I am on it, that it needs to be cleaned up. And my daughter was on that map that Melissa presented earlier. And I think that's grossly the gross understatement of the number of children that have been affected. And I'm appalled that there's never been a study, cancer study of children in the neighborhood. I've seen the adult ones, but adults can handle that a lot better than children or pregnant women. And my wife was pregnant during that time. So, do your job. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Thomas Ridge. I initially wasn't going to say anything. I feel like I'm probably the most uninformed person here in this room. I just found out about this yesterday. I've lived in the area.
Did you say your name?
Thomas Ridge.
Thank you.
I've lived in the area for nearly 20 years, and I never knew there was a nuclear disaster. That's kind of crazy. It's a little bit surreal. So I came here to try to get some answers. I'm a father of two. I have a baby on the way in about a month, and I honestly came here not knowing much, and I am kind of walking away not knowing much at all either, which is just insane to me. And I feel like the woman earlier mentioned a movie. I kind of feel, have you guys ever seen that movie Armageddon, right? They're at the end and they're in the space shuttle, like the bomb's going to go off, and Bruce Willis and the other guy are arguing, and there's the one guy who's just like, just turn it off, you know? Like, I feel like I'm that guy, because I'm like, what the hell is going on right now? And, you know, I try to use in I own several businesses, both overseas and domestically. I try to use experience guided with common sense, and I don't have a lot of experience with what everyone's talking about, so I'll just try to rely on my common sense. But there was some type of event that occurred. Obviously, I think everyone agrees things are contaminated to some degree. I just think we should just clean it up. Just like, I don't know if I'm being too simple. I apologize if I am, but let's just clean it up, and let's worry about the natural settings later after it's cleaned up. And, you know, that'll be good, and I don't have to worry about my kids and thinking, you know, should I move out of the area? Because I have no freaking clue what's going on here for 20 years and have no idea there was a nuclear incident. I'm not an uninformed person, which is crazy, because I literally had to, like, basically my wife and I were talking about Fukushima, because it came up in the news. And I randomly, like, we were talking like, hey, what would be the worst accident here in the United States? And I was thinking 3 Mile Island. We literally Googled it yesterday, and freaking Simi Valley came up. I'm like, what? This is a joke, right? I mean, and I'm a pretty informed person. I just didn't know to look in my own backyard. And I'll be honest, when Fukushima happened, my wife and I were kind of talking about, hey, you know, that radiation come over here. Like, we were having a serious discussion about that. And I'm 5 miles from this thing. So anyway, I know I don't have a lot of time. I respect you guys. I know it must be tough sitting here. You probably go around the country doing this. So I'm not wacko, I'm not crazy. I'm just trying to use common sense. Let's just clean the mess up as best we can so that there's no mess left. And then we'll worry about all the other environmental habitat things later. Just common sense.